Welcome to Lunch and Look at the Stark Museum of Art, where our topic today is Buffalo Soldiers in Art. We're going to be looking today at works of art that represent the African American soldiers in the U.S. Army in the historic period, particularly after the Civil War. We're going to look at the term Buffalo Soldiers and also see how these military officers and enlisted men and women appear in art. A subject that it has in some histories of art has been overlooked, especially in the past. In more recent years, we find new research being done and incorporated into works of art, such as the representation of Kathy Williams, aka William Cathay, female Buffalo Soldier that you see before you now. The representation of the Buffalo Soldier also does exist in the past. It simply is less well known. We're going to look at some examples of art that show indications of an interest in the stories of these African American soldiers. In this post-Civil War period, there was a debate in Congress about having blacks in the regular army after the Civil War. What would the role be during the peacetime? Congress eventually decided to form, in the 1866 period, several regiments, 2 of cavalry. The 9th and the 10th would be regiments devoted to membership by African American artists, and 4 of infantry, the 38th through the 41st, and later reorganized. And this would be the regular army during the peacetime. Stationed, however, primarily in the West. These soldiers were seen as playing a role in making Western territories safe for the colonial settlers who were coming into the territory. It meant that the African American soldiers were dispossessing the native peoples from their lands, and these black regiments were in a relationship of opposition to Native Americans. And that plays a role in the unique name that was applied to the African American soldiers, the term Buffalo Soldiers. Where did the name originate? One of the earliest published uses of the term Buffalo Soldiers was by an unidentified author of a letter written from Fort Sill, which was Indian Territory, where there were companies of the 10th Regiment Cavalry stationed. The colored troops, as they were called, they were called by the Comanches Buffalo Soldiers because, like the buffalo, they are woolly. And these are in excellent drill and condition. The author went on to say that the Indians treated the Buffalo Soldiers with contempt, but with fighting they came to respect them. These so-called Buffalo Soldiers are active, intelligent, and resolute men, and are perfectly willing to fight the Indians, and appear to me to be rather superior to the average white man recruited in time of peace. So we see the term of Buffalo Soldiers applied to the black soldiers by those whom they were opposing, the Native Americans. And this anecdote was Comanches. It's also said that the Apaches used the term, and it seems to have been a way of making a nickname for the opposing force, saying that the Indians treated them with contempt. So it was, in that usage, it was not popular. Other commentators on the term buffalo soldiers have referred to the fact that many Native Americans have a particular reverence for the buffalo. It plays a role in the rituals, as we see in the Kiowa representation of a buffalo dancer. And so somehow buffalo soldiers connoted a term of reverence. I think the original intention grew to have new meanings as more was learned about the buffalo soldiers, which is a suggestion that I hope we will benefit from in our examination of the visual representations of the buffalo soldiers. One of the earliest visual representations, specifically representing the regiments of the 9th and the 10th Cavalries, was by the artist Frederick Remington. And Remington, who's known for his stereotype views of the American West, of his identification with the United States Army, early in his career, devoted a significant portion of his artistic output to representing the buffalo soldiers of the American West. Part of his career that is not well known, but has recently been revived through scholarship of artists on the American West and historians of black soldiers in the U.S. Army. Remington's first representation of the buffalo soldiers was through a drawing that he made that must have been rather crude because it was redrawn by another artist who, Duré de Tulstrap, who took also visual credit for the representation. It was published in Harper's Weekly magazine, on the cover of the magazine, in 1885, but it was probably based on an earlier drawing made by Remington about 1883. At that time, he was a very young man who was trying to find his way in life. I had a great admiration for the West. He had made one trip in 1881. He was trying to find a suitable employment for his as an occupation. He bought a sheep ranch in Kansas and was going to be a rancher. Although the realities of ranch work, it turned out, really did not appeal that much to Remington, especially with sheep. That was not romantic nor practical enough for him. When he found time to leave the ranch, he would go riding in the region around Peabody, Kansas, where his ranch was, and he went prospecting, as he called it, going so far as the Indian Territory to the south, now the state of Oklahoma. It was territory set aside by the U.S. government for tribes that had been brought there from being removed from southern and more easterly home locations. And it was supposed to be their home, but there were already colonial white settlers who were eager to settle in that portions of the territory which had not been identified with specific tribes, although that was prohibited by the U.S. government. And there were several instances in which the military had to remove these boomers who came into the Indian Territory without permission. Remington in nearby Kansas, coming down into the Indian Territory, certainly heard about the incursions of the boomers, although he may not have directly witnessed this particular event. That was a common characteristic of the way Remington approached. He Many of his works did rely on stories that he heard in the West, but he had the knowledge of at least an eyewitness to the region, and that's certainly the case with this. He certainly came down into Indian Territory. He witnessed the cavalry. He could have seen them at the forts in the area. The one drawing for Harper's Weekly was the second published work of art that Remington had produced in his short career, but it was perhaps one element that convinced him that what his real desire in life was an artist. And after he sold his ranch and he was unsuccessful in running a saloon in Kansas, he decided to focus on becoming an artist, particularly an artist illustrator, traveling in the West, sending back both drawings and narratives about the changing world of the western portion of the American continent. So in 1886, he went out west again to Arizona, and used that time in Arizona to make many drawings, watercolor sketches of the sights and the people, and had those published in the magazines of the day. On the right of the screen, you see his watercolor drawing of a riderless horse being brought in back perhaps to the army post by a black trooper whose comrade has been lost in battle. Of course, the riderless horse is often a motif in funeral processions for fallen soldiers. In this case, it's not a funeral, but it is a scene of action where the comrade is bringing back the news of the loss of a soldier, and we see that poignantly. We see the missing soldier, but we also see the resolute man of action, who is one of the Buffalo Soldiers, because when Remington came to Arizona in 1886, he made contact with the 10th Regiment and spent time with them and brought back drawings of scenes that he witnessed and other scenes that he heard about. For another cover of Harper's Weekly magazine, now this time his total work and some, however, translated by wood engraving, for an article that he produced, Soldiering in the Southwest, the Rescue of Corporal Scott. He represented a story that was told to him about the heroic actions of Lieutenant Powhatan Clark, who is the figure at the top of this triangle of figures, and the fallen soldier who needed rescuing is Corporal Scott, is on the ground, and another African American unnamed soldier is assisting Clark in rescuing Corporal Scott. They were being in a skirmish with probably the Apaches. Clark, who Remington called a manly man, received a Medal of Honor for his actions at this time. Scott had been shot and severely wounded in both legs, so he was unable to move, and Powhatan Clark rushed in to pull him to safely. So here we have the example of a white officer, Powhatan Clark, saving the African American artist, although saving the African American soldier, sorry, although the soldier also exhibited his bravery and his sacrifice. Although Remington became friends with Powhatan Clark, greatly admired this lieutenant, and it was through his friendship with Clark that he had access then to the soldiers in the regiment. At this time, the regiments of African American soldiers were always led by officers who were white, because the African American soldiers did not have access to the training and education that the Army had as requirements for officers. So there was always this hierarchy that is represented as well in Remington's drawing, but he also represents the camaraderie that existed between the races in the Army. A recent scholar, John Langelier, has identified how Remington heard this story. It was told to him by Sergeant William H. Givens, who was an African American sergeant in the regiment. Remington heard it over a brandy in the hotel when he joined and met the leaders of the regiment. One would think at this time that it would be unusual for a white artist to be drinking with an basically non-commissioned officer and a black at that time. But in some ways, it appears that there was more fluidity and more contact between the officers and those in the hierarchy and the soldiers among the black regiments, partially because they understood the hierarchies that place certain social strictures on the relationship. Sergeant Givens' portrait bust is in the drawing to the right, which is a Remington sketch of actually two different scenes. The lower part of it is an African American soldier who is saddling up a horse for probably a scouting trip into the West. And then, although the figure is posed on top, he's not sitting in the saddle of that horse. It seems to be an entirely different drawing. He's facing a different way, but that's Sergeant Givens, and that told the story to Remington about Lieutenant Clark and his heroic role, and Corporal Scott's heroic role. This adventure in Arizona in 1886 then led to another trip when Remington returned 2 years later in 1888 to the Arizona territory. Again, he made contact with Lieutenant Powhatan Clark, who invited Remington on a scouting journey in the Arizona desert. Remington was at first a little apprehensive about this opportunity because he knew it meant 2 weeks of very hard riding, Remington could ride a horse, but he didn't have daily experience riding for long distances. And it would be in the hot Arizona sun and the dusty climate, but it was also something that Remington could not turn down. This was the opportunity for an artist to be really tested in his experiences and to be firsthand in gaining knowledge about the life of the military. So Remington agreed to join in this journey, and Powhatan Clark worked to make it somewhat easy for Remington. They found a horse that would accommodate his large size, The journey included 5 African American soldiers, an experienced sergeant, and then 4 additional enlisted men. And there were also 2 packers who packed all the gear on the mules that accompanied the soldiers and their horses. We don't have a lot of detail on the packers. Now, Remington was a man of his time here in the late 19th century from an Eastern establishment family. He went to Yale University, although he didn't finish. He was the son of a newspaper man who was generally prosperous. And he harbored much of the racial prejudice of his time, especially if you read his journals and letters. He uses language in describing other races that is offensive today, and was in that day as well. His letters indicated his understandings of racial biases, but through his journeys, particularly this time in Arizona, he certainly came to respect African Americans as soldiers and portrayed them with respect. We see the painting before us, Marching in the Desert. This is one of the paintings that he did that was later used as an illustration for his story, A Scout with the Buffalo Soldiers. You see the party in the long line. It's led by Lieutenant Clark, followed by Remington, who wears not a field hat, but what appears to be a helmet, but certainly something that would protect him from the sun. He has a more light-colored shirt, so that also distinguishes him from the army. And then in the line behind are the additional soldiers. This painting is one of several instances where Remington includes himself in the picture. And this is, in a sense, a kind of a certificate of authenticity. He is showing, I was there, I was a part of this, I participated. And this is a sense of the artist showing his knowledge base, and a knowledge base that is not intellectual or not obtained from books, but it is a knowledge base of action. And this was very much part of how Remington presented the worth of his works of art. It's that they they give us information, knowledge, and it comes from knowledge. And this distinguishes him from other artists who sit in a studio. Remington complained about the rigors of this time in Arizona, the heat, the dust, the difficulty of long rides, and the dangers of the ride, such as the very steep mountain area where it was necessary to dismount, not only his dismount, but the other soldiers as well, although he also did drawings of the African American soldiers and their horses, surmounting the difficulties of the very steep incline by the horsemanship of the rider and the characteristics of the horse itself in learning to maneuver through the very steep incline. One of the subjects that Remington was addressing in the story was providing information about the African American soldiers back to Eastern audiences, because one of the arguments in setting up the regiments by Congress was, with the prejudices of the day, were these soldiers capable of fighting to the extent that they would be successful. And in his story that Remington wrote, A Scout with the Buffalo Soldiers, he wrote, "As to their bravery, I am often asked, will they fight? That is easily answered. They have fought many, many times." So it's that bravery, the willingness to fight that Remington valued himself and conveyed to the public in his works of art. This pen and ink drawing of the sergeant and the 4 enlisted men around a campfire also is one of the works that provided an illustration for A Scout with the Buffalo Soldiers. This is in the collection of the Stark Museum of Art. Although it's not currently on view, it does need some conservation and to protect the integrity of the work of art for future generations. So when we're able to complete that, it will go on view. It's an incredibly handsome picture of the African American soldiers. And it relates to the text of A Scout with the Buffalo Soldiers, although not specifically one moment in time, one passage, but several of the passages in the story relate to this particular sketch. For one thing, Remington describes the sergeant. We see the standing figure of the sergeant with the chevrons on his sleeve. Remington in his text described him as grown old in the service, scarred in battlefields, hardened by long marches. So he's someone who has a great history, who is a military man to the nth degree, and in his portrayal of this sergeant, we see him as a particularly self-contained and proud man. He looks out to the audience, looks resolutely, elegantly, and a figure of great admiration. The other figures gathered around are the enlisted men, and in the presentation of those, we see some exaggeration of features that I think Remington is relying more on received imagery than the type of first-hand observation that he shows with the sergeant. The text also talks, there are several places where it talks about the gathering around campfire, and this, I think, is part of how Remington conveys the everyday life of the soldier, in a sense, just the typical task that make the scouting possible. But he also has a couple of other interpretations. In talking about the officers, he refers to officers who become almost despondent with their roles in the sort of loneliness of their positions. He wrote that officers who are troubled have only to go to the campfires of the Negro soldiers to be amused and cheered. And he goes on to say how there the soldiers they give a lightness to the officers that can change the situation. In some sense, it is a stereotype of the ever-cheerful Negro, but on the other hand, it shows a relationship between, and it could indicate why the campfire was so important as a subject for Remington's pen. He also talks about the next morning when the soldiers had 2 black campfires over the fire, steaming cups of coffee. It's the scene of setting out for the day. And I think it could be read either way. It's the evening campfire where the you're relaxing at the end of the day, or it's starting out in the early morning day, which we'll see shortly was the direction Remington later took this sketch when he reworked it for an oil painting. I want you to notice also the small vignette in the distance, where we have two figures, one standing and one half bending over. The standing figure, I believe, is a self-portrait of Frederic Remington. The figure again wears that helmet, which Remington seemed to use throughout his time with scouting with the Buffalo Soldiers. The figure is posing, standing rather resolutely. I have interpreted the half-bending figure as perhaps taking a photograph of Remington. Remington brought a camera with him on this trip and used it to make photographs to use as memory aids for his sketches. His camera would have been a little more elaborate than is implied by this. Might have required a dark room setting. Later he would have smaller, more portable cameras and traveling the West. But I think the intention may be to represent that idea of illustrating oneself in the picture to signify that I was there. Certainly this article, A Scout with the Buffalo Soldiers, contributed to Remington's authority as an artist correspondent, and it helped to solidify his career and to give him special significance as someone who both experienced the West and who brought back unique subjects in showing the Buffalo Soldiers. For the next few years, he continued to represent scenes of Buffalo Soldiers, for example, illustrating for other artists. The next painting by Remington, Captain Dodge's Troops to the Rescue, or as it's also known when it was illustrated, Captain Dodge's Colored Troops to the Rescue. This was for an essay by E.V. Sumner on besieged by the Utes, the Ute Indians, and Captain Dodge leading his troops into a situation where they were rescuing other soldiers. The gallant dash made by these colored troopers brought them into high favor with the rest of the command, and nothing was considered too good for the Buffalo Soldiers after that, according to Sumner's article. And Remington's representation, he uses a composition, and basically it's this early form of it, of the triangle of soldiers riding almost out of the canvas, confronting the viewer and representing that sense of the conquering the landscape. Again, it's the white officer at the apex of the triangle that's almost coming into our space, and the colored troopers shooting behind him. He also did works of art such as The Alert, which seemed to be not so much an illustration, but a fine art easel painting. He was beginning to exhibit at some of the major exhibitions like the National Academy of Art, and he deemed the Buffalo Soldier as a worthy subject. However, we find also that Remington is beginning to take his sketches of the Buffalo Soldiers and translate them into other form. The sketch, a campfire sketch that was published as an illustration, features that group of 5 soldiers and basically in a circle. And we see that being a similar composition to his painting a few years later, A Cavalryman's Breakfast on the Plains, which was not intended as an illustration, but as a fine art easel painting. You see he's elaborated it greatly with actually groups of cavalrymen having breakfast, creating this narrative of the soldiers. And we see in the background their line of horses getting ready for the early morning. But in this case, all of the soldiers are white. Scholars who have looked at this change from the basic composition of the campfire sketch to the breakfast on the plains, as Remington, in a sense, whitewashing his subjects, turning them from black soldiers into white soldiers. Probably he's responding to market conditions, to economic realities of the time, that his wealthy patrons are more likely to respond to paintings of Anglo-American soldiers as opposed to African-American, and bowing to that reality. Certainly later in his career, we don't find the emphasis on the Buffalo Soldier that we saw in his early career. And we find with other artists that it's special circumstances when they represent African-American artists, African-American soldiers. William Herbert Dunton, one of the Taos Society of Artists, also represented Buffalo soldiers. He depicted the 9th Cavalry, not from an expedition like Remington, but from an exhibition. He saw the 9th Cavalry at Cheyenne Frontier Days, which was a Wild West fair and performance and rodeo. The 9th Cavalry at that time, in the early 20th century, was stationed at Fort D.A. Russell in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and they participated in the Cheyenne Frontier Days events. Dunton wrote an article for Scribner's Magazine in 1914 about the 4-day experience. He wrote about the, quote, the Roman races by the men of the 9th Cavalry from Fort D.A. Russell are a fine sight. And we see left the illustration from the article that he wrote, which was called The Fair in the Cow Country. The location of the painting is unknown. He shows the 9th Cavalry soldiers riding Roman style with the 2 horses tethered together and balancing one leg on the back of each horse, and then racing their comrades. Very difficult feat. So we see the excellent horsemanship of the riders. And then Dunton wrote that the races were followed by a sham battle, but the finest spectacle of this event is the grand finale of the engagement, the charge of the colored troopers. This spectacular dash is an inspiring picture, none finer than a whole fair than these black horsemen with sabers drawn and mounted on big handsome bays, thundering down the field on a dead run in lines as straight as arrows. And in his text, he's telling us that about the black horsemen. But you have to almost look closely in his painting to see the black horsemen, because, of course, again, they are led by the white officer, who is presented as at the focal point of the illustration, and the black soldiers are in the distance. It did not become a common subject for Dunton's pen or brush. Settled in Taos, New Mexico, and did cowboys and hunters, but mostly of Anglo-American heritage. Well, in the early 20th century, there may be scattered representations of Buffalo soldiers, but it's really with the changing emphasis in historical research, the introduction of more African-American scholars and subjects, and African-American artists who are willing to take subjects that we find more representations of these soldiers. And particularly at the Stark Museum, we were fortunate to have an exhibition of art quilts made by African-American women who are quilters and fine artists, and who chose to represent subjects in the history of the American West in an exhibition called Black Pioneers, Legacy in the American West. and several represented Buffalo soldiers. For example, Thomasita Louvière-Legance did a double portrait of two African-American soldiers who received that highest award from the United States, the Medal of Honor for valor. They were both soldiers who guarded during what was called the Wham Paymaster robbery. Major Joseph Wham was an Army paymaster who had a payout of gold coins equaling $28,000, and infantry soldiers were guards for him from the 24th Infantry, which had been reorganized from the earlier infantry regiments. And they were ambushed by a group of bandits, and there was a fierce gun battle, and soldiers were wounded. Sergeant Benjamin Brown's citation said that although shot in the abdomen in a fight between the paymaster's escort and robbers, he did not leave the field until again wounded through both arms. And Mays' citation noted his gallantry in the fight between Paymaster Wham's escort and robbers. Mays walked and crawled 2 miles to a ranch for help. So Louvière-Legance took portraits of the two Medal of Honor winners and transformed them into a fabric representation of a little-known moment in Western history. I noted earlier how the regiments of cavalry and infantry were led by white officers because the black soldiers did not have access to the training. We find that situation changing and somewhat with particularly exceptional soldiers such as Lieutenant Charles Young, who we see represented here in the quilt by Carolyn Crump, The Game Changer. Young loved his country, and he was the first black national park superintendent, the first black military attaché, and the first black soldier to achieve the rank of colonel. Crump represented Young at the time that he is a lieutenant. He actually was able to attend West Point Academy for the U.S. Army and graduated in 1889, at the time when Remington is publishing his representations of Buffalo soldiers in the West. And then Young was stationed at Fort Duchesne in Utah, where he is to keep peace with the Ute Indians there and keep them from returning to their traditional homes in Colorado. So at this moment in time when Carolyn Crump represents in her quilt, and she uses various symbols to indicate qualities of Lieutenant Young. The eagle with its qualities of majesty, strength, power, and freedom. And the flag, of course, shows love of country. He's shown with his rifle that he is ahead of his time, that he is focused in his approach. The panther indicates wilderness, which of course the posting seemed to be in the American wilderness. The bear paw quilt blocks symbolize that he was born into slavery in Kentucky. The map, that he was a map maker. Lieutenant Young's career was long and eventful. He, as well, later would serve in the Philippines. He became the park superintendent at Sequoia National Park. He taught at Wilberforce University and was a military attaché to Haiti, Liberia, and posthumously received the rank of brigadier general. An incredible story of a man who confronted great prejudice. At his time at West Point was not happy. He was shunned by the other students, but he was able to face those difficulties and succeed as an officer and a soldier and an American patriot. Georgia Williams tells a very different story about a Buffalo soldier. She tells the story of Kathy Williams, a female who enlisted in the infantry by disguising herself as a male and adopting a name, William Cathay, kind of turning her name around. She served for a couple of years before her identity was discovered, but she did serve in the Army and can be seen as someone who broke barriers not only for her race but for her gender. Artist Lauren Alyssa Austin also represented the Buffalo Soldiers. In this case, not a specific individual, but the idea of the Buffalo Soldiers who gave up their contacts with their home and family and went out west to serve in the Army and to work as soldiers. She did a great deal of research to portray the soldiers. For example, she located a particular kind of pistol that they were given to the Army, a Colt Army model, and she noted that they became very good at shooting with these particular weapons, and she went to a gun shop so that she could study the pistol and use it effectively in her quilt. And the point as well being that it's this type of research and willingness to look into the past and to discover unknown facts that has brought forth many of these new stories that the artist represents. Jeanette Floyd took another turn with the Buffalo Soldier and researched Colonel Allen Allensworth, a former slave who was in the Army and a Buffalo Soldier, who started a colony, a town in California, and saw it as to be governed entirely by African Americans. He saw it as a self-sufficient community where black people could live free from discrimination and thrive through education, hard work, and cooperation. And thus he found the town of Allensworth, California, which did flourish for a number of years before other hazards caused dissolution, and it is now, though, preserved through a state park. Carolyn Crump portrayed another scene of Buffalo Soldiers. Like Austin, she focused on one individual, but on the Buffalo Soldier of the 10th Cavalry Regiment in general. And she wrote about the work that she made is a fabric vase with woven fabric to form the structure. You can see inside the vase on the left, the view where you can see how the fabric is woven together, and then appliqued figures on all around the surface of the Buffalo Soldiers in action, and then the leaves indicating the outdoors and nature, and the area that contrasts the interior. She wrote about this work, the 10th Cavalry was one of the original Buffalo Soldier regiments in the post-Civil War regular army. I wanted this vase to represent their service and contributions to the nation, but I also wanted to pay homage to my relatives and friends who did their part to protect the freedoms that we enjoy in this great nation. It was personal to me, which is why I wanted to create the inside weaving as a reflection of how we are a part of the fabric of this nation. So the very action of putting the piece together is part of the symbolism of this work. And I think also that choosing to represent it as a vase gives some connotations that add to the symbolism and imagery. For example, vases with scenes of warfare go back to ancient Greece, where pottery vases often had representations on the surface of battle scenes and heroic soldiers. And so in comparison, the vase can be seen as drawing upon that tradition, whether it specifically does or not. It's that the heroic ideal represented in an object that could be an everyday object, but is elevated as well by its representation of higher values. And also, the fabric, the fact that it's made from originally a plant material, sets up some resonance with Apache baskets. And of course, the Apache were the so-called enemies of the Buffalo Soldiers. But the Apache basketry shows using that form of an everyday object, but elevating it through the representation and the artistic qualities that make it an object of beauty as well as a practical item. And it also has the similarity of incorporating human figures. It's a point of consonants that lends solemnity to Crump's work, and so it makes it associate with the broader stories of the American West, but she also wants you to realize the contemporary resonance of telling stories that are relevant for those of us today. And to conclude, I want to look back. I want to point out that we've seen examples of American soldiers being portrayed in Western art where we previously might not have known about them, as in the works of Frederick Remington and W. Herbert Dunton. We can rediscover these forgotten parts of these artists and realize that the African-American soldiers provided worthy subjects for the pens and brushes of these artists. But as well, we look to the 21st century artists such as Carolyn Crump, who research the history of African-American soldiers and bring them vividly into our knowledge base from the creative works of art that they're making today. I believe our stories are enriched by with these narratives that the artists present in vivid and life-giving ways. They enrich our lives with new ideas, with new understanding, and new relevance for our lives by making us a greater understanding of the history that has gone before us. Thank you for the opportunity today to discuss these works with you, and I hope you enjoy seeing them and seeing them firsthand in the future. Thank you.